It was a peaceful spring morning in Toledo, Ohio, a day that should have been filled with quiet devotion and preparation for Easter Sunday. The chapel stood as a beacon of faith and serenity, a place where the community found solace. But that morning, the unthinkable shattered the calm. As the sun bathed the stained glass windows in hues of red and gold, a horrifying discovery awaited in the sacristy, a space meant to embody sanctity and prayer. Sister Margaret, a 72-year-old nun deeply respected for her decades of service, was found lifeless on the cold stone floor. The scene was disturbing, almost theatrical in its arrangement. Her body was carefully posed, wrapped in a white altar cloth, with a crucifix placed beneath her. Symbols of devotion now steeped in eerie darkness. The unsettling details didn't end there. Her arms were outstretched in an unnatural position, and her wide-open eyes bore a haunting expression, frozen in what appeared to be terror. The room was silent, yet the air seemed heavy, as though the walls themselves were witnesses to something unspeakable. News of the discovery spread quickly, and whispers of dark rituals began to ripple through the town. Toledo, a city rooted in deep faith, had never seen anything like this. People spoke in hushed tones, questioning whether this was a crime born of rage, an act of madness, or something far more sinister. Even more alarming was the swift suspicion cast upon the chapel's own priest, Father Zero Robinson. A man once trusted with the sacred duties of the church now stood at the center of a chilling mystery. His actions leading up to the event, and the evidence found in his quarters, suggested a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. But was this merely a crime of impulse, or did it mask something far more deliberate? As investigators delved deeper, what they uncovered would challenge not only the justice system, but the faith of an entire community. The line between devotion and darkness blurred, leaving everyone to question what truly happened in that sacred space. In the heart of Toledo, Ohio, the chapel stood as a testament to unwavering faith and tradition. For years, it had been a sanctuary where the faithful gathered, seeking solace and divine connection. Among those who dedicated their lives to its upkeep was Sister Margaret Ann, a 72-year-old nun whose reputation for discipline and devotion preceded her. Her journey into the church began in the small, humble town of her childhood, where faith was woven into the fabric of daily life. Margaret's path to the convent was almost inevitable, molded by her upbringing in a deeply religious household. The youngest of 8 siblings, she was raised by devout Catholic parents who instilled in her a love for the church and its teachings. 2 of her older sisters had already joined the church, and Margaret followed in their footsteps with unwavering determination. Her dedication to her faith was evident from a young age, and by her 20s, she had earned a master's degree in literature, followed by a nursing certification. Through the decades, Margaret became an irreplaceable figure within her community, known for her gentle demeanor and her strict adherence to the rules of the church. She was a woman of order, committed to maintaining the sacred traditions that defined her world. Her role at the chapel extended beyond spiritual guidance. She ensured that every ritual, every prayer, every symbol was executed with precision. To those who knew her, she was a pillar of strength, unwavering in her commitment to her faith. But Margaret's steadfast ways often clashed with the modern changes being introduced into the church. The arrival of Father Zero Robinson, a much younger priest with a bold and unorthodox approach, marked the beginning of tension within the chapel walls. At 42 years old, Zero was charismatic and ambitious, having graduated from a prestigious theological seminary. Despite his high-ranking position, his methods often raised eyebrows among the older clergy. Zero's approach to his duties was casual, bordering on dismissive of the traditions Margaret cherished. To her, his disregard for the sanctity of rituals was not only frustrating, but deeply unsettling. Their interactions were frequently strained, with Margaret confronting him about his decisions she believed undermined the sacred order of their church. For Zero, these confrontations were an annoyance, and his attitude toward Margaret became increasingly dismissive, even hostile. The night before Easter Sunday in 1980 was no exception. Tensions were high after Zero abruptly ended a service early, a move that Margaret saw as a blatant disregard for tradition. Witnesses recounted that Margaret sought Zero out that evening to discuss the incident. Her questions were met with cold indifference, and their exchange was brief but charged with frustration. Margaret left the conversation visibly upset, her disappointment etched into her face. By the next morning, Margaret was back to her routine, rising early to prepare for the day's events. She was seen in the dining hall, quietly enjoying a simple breakfast, as she often did. It was her birthday, but Margaret showed no signs of celebration. She moved with her usual purpose, quietly determined to ensure that everything was in place for the Easter service. What happened next remains a point of both intrigue and horror. Around 7:30 a.m., faint but hurried footsteps were heard echoing through the halls of the chapel. Some described the sound as urgent, almost frantic, as if someone was trying to escape or conceal something. Moments later, Sister Margaret was discovered in the sacristy. The stark contrast between the life Margaret had dedicated to faith and the manner in which her life ended sent shockwaves through the community. As investigators began to piece together the events leading to her tragic demise, questions of motive, opportunity, and hidden intent started to arise. The chapel, once a place of unity, became a site of whispers and suspicion, its walls now harboring a dark and troubling secret. The clash between tradition and modernity, devotion and betrayal, reverberated far beyond the chapel doors. The people of Toledo, caught between their faith and the unfolding horror, were left to grapple with the chilling realization that even the holiest places could harbor the darkest of shadows. The discovery of Sister Margaret's lifeless body in the sacristy sent immediate shockwaves through the chapel and the broader community. The scene was hauntingly deliberate, almost ritualistic in its arrangement, leaving no doubt that this was not a random act of violence. As investigators arrived at the scene, they were met with an unsettling combination of sacred symbols and desecration, a stark contrast that only deepened the mystery surrounding her death. Margaret's body was positioned with her arms outstretched, as if mimicking the crucifixion, her frail frame draped in the white altar cloth that symbolized purity. The crucifix beneath her, a sacred object representing sacrifice and redemption, was now part of a tableau that felt both sacrilegious and intentional. The room was eerily quiet, the usual warmth of the chapel replaced by an oppressive silence, as if the space itself mourned the violation that had occurred. The investigators began their work methodically, collecting evidence and documenting the scene. Among the items discovered was a small knife tucked beneath the altar, its blade stained with a substance that would later be identified as blood. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing else in the room appeared disturbed. This only added to the sense that the perpetrator had acted with a clear and calculated purpose, using the sacred space as the backdrop for their chilling act. Attention quickly turned to those within the chapel, particularly Father Zero Robinson. The young priest had been the subject of quiet discontent among some of the clergy, and his strained relationship with Margaret was well known. Witnesses recalled their tense interactions, particularly the argument they had the evening before her death. Zero's dismissive attitude toward Margaret's concerns had not gone unnoticed, and his apparent frustration with her adherence to tradition was a frequent point of contention. When authorities questioned Zero, his demeanor was calm, almost indifferent. He denied any involvement in Margaret's death, dismissing the notion as absurd. However, his lack of emotion and evasive answers raised immediate suspicions. Investigators found their breakthrough when they searched his quarters. Inside, they discovered a ceremonial robe with small traces of what appeared to be blood. More damning, they uncovered a book containing references to obscure rituals that seemed to align disturbingly with the positioning of Margaret's body. Despite the mounting evidence, Zero maintained his innocence, claiming that the bloodstains were from an unrelated incident and that the book was merely a curiosity he had studied during seminary. His explanations, however, did little to quell the growing unease among investigators and the community. The more they probed, the more inconsistencies they uncovered in his account of the morning's events. Several witnesses reported hearing heavy, hurried footsteps near Zero's quarters around the time Margaret was last seen alive. Others mentioned seeing him leave the chapel in an unusually disheveled state, his normally pristine clerical attire slightly askew. These accounts painted a picture of a man who was not only present at the time of the crime, but potentially fleeing the scene in haste. As the investigation deepened, whispers of something darker began to surface. The manner in which Margaret's body was positioned, combined with the discovery of the ritualistic texts in Zero's possession, led some to believe that her death was not merely the result of personal animosity, but part of a deliberate act rooted in ritual. The term Black Mass began to circulate among investigators, a phrase that sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned officers. A Black Mass, a perversion of the sacred Catholic liturgy, was rumored to involve the desecration of religious symbols and the use of human sacrifice as an offering to dark forces. While these accounts were often dismissed as the stuff of urban legends, the parallels to Margaret's death were difficult to ignore. Her body had been positioned in a way that seemed to mimic these sinister rituals, and the presence of the crucifix and altar cloth only reinforced the chilling theory. Forensic analysis of the knife found at the scene confirmed that it had been used in the act, and the blood matched Margaret's. This discovery, combined with the evidence found in Zero's quarters, painted a damning picture. Yet, despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, there were still those who defended him. Members of the local Polish community, many of whom held Zero in high regard, rallied to his defense, insisting that he was incapable of such a heinous act. Their unwavering support created a divide within the community, with some calling for justice for Margaret, and others demanding that Zero's name be cleared. The church's involvement added another layer of complexity to the case. As the investigation progressed, high-ranking members of the diocese began to exert pressure on local authorities. There were whispered conversations behind closed doors, requests for leniency, and subtle hints that the matter should be handled internally rather than in the public eye. For many, this interference was infuriating, a blatant attempt to shield one of their own from accountability. Zero, for his part, remained defiant. He denied any knowledge of the rituals described in the book found in his room, claiming that his possession of it was purely academic. He insisted that Margaret's death was the work of an outsider, someone who had taken advantage of the chapel's open-door policy to commit an unspeakable act. When pressed for details, he mentioned an alleged confession from an unnamed individual, a story that quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Despite his protests, the evidence against him continued to mount. Forensic experts identified fibers from Margaret's altar cloth on Zero's robe, further connecting him to the scene. Witnesses recalled his erratic behavior in the days leading up to the crime, describing him as agitated and distracted. Yet the question remained: what could have driven him to commit such a horrifying act? The community, once united in faith, found itself divided and uncertain. The possibility that someone entrusted with the spiritual care of others could be capable of such a crime was almost too much to bear. As the case unfolded, it became clear that Margaret's death was not only a personal tragedy, but a symbol of something far more profound: a loss of trust, a fracture in the very foundation of their beliefs. The weight of these revelations hung heavy over the chapel, its walls now steeped in the memory of that terrible morning. What had once been a place of solace and prayer was now marked by suspicion and fear. A grim reminder that even in the holiest of places, darkness could find a way in. As investigators unraveled the details surrounding Sister Margaret's tragic death, theories began to emerge, each attempting to explain the motivations behind the crime. The evidence painted a complex picture, one that pointed not only to interpersonal conflict, but also to darker, more unexplainable elements that seemed almost ritualistic in nature. One of the most compelling theories centered on the idea that the crime was deeply personal. Witnesses recalled the tension between Sister Margaret and Father Zero, a dynamic that had been brewing since his arrival. Margaret's strict adherence to tradition and her constant reminders to Zero about protocol could have driven him to a breaking point. The argument they had the evening before her death seemed to be a pivotal moment, one where frustration and resentment may have boiled over into something far more sinister. Some believe that Zero's actions were impulsive, a crime of passion committed in a moment of anger and subsequently disguised as something more calculated to mislead investigators. Yet, as details of the scene emerged, this theory seemed insufficient to account for the deliberate, almost ceremonial nature of the crime. The placement of Sister Margaret's body, the use of sacred objects, and the discovery of texts related to occult practices in Zero's possession pointed to something far more chilling. This led to a second, more disturbing hypothesis, that Margaret's death was part of a deliberate ritual, one tied to the concept of a black mass. The idea of a black mass, while often sensationalized, had historical roots in practices meant to invert and desecrate religious symbols. The positioning of Margaret's body, mimicking the crucifixion, and the use of the altar cloth and crucifix aligned with elements described in these forbidden rites. The texts found in Zero's room contained references to such rituals, suggesting that he had at least some knowledge of these practices. But what would drive a priest, a man dedicated to faith, to engage in something so profoundly contradictory to his vows? Was this an act of rebellion, a deliberate rejection of his role, or something else entirely? Some speculated that Zero's behavior could have been influenced by external forces. Psychological evaluations conducted during the investigation suggested that he had been under significant stress in the months leading up to the crime. The weight of his responsibilities, combined with his contentious relationship with Margaret, may have created a perfect storm of emotions. But others believe that Zero's involvement went deeper, suggesting that he had become entangled in occult practices long before the crime occurred. The discovery of ritualistic texts raised questions about whether Zero had been acting alone. Was this a personal obsession, or was he part of a larger hidden network operating under the guise of religious institutions? Such theories, while difficult to substantiate, fueled rumors within the community and beyond. The idea that a trusted figure within the church could have ties to practices so antithetical to its teachings was both shocking and compelling. Then there was the theory of external manipulation, one that suggested Zero himself could have been a pawn in a larger, more sinister game. Some believe that Margaret's death was intended to send a message, though who the message was meant for and what it symbolized remained unclear. Could the crime have been orchestrated by someone seeking to undermine the church, using Zero as the scapegoat? The timing, just before Easter, added weight to this idea, suggesting that the act was designed to cause maximum disruption and fear. Adding to the complexity were the actions of the church itself. The swift intervention of high-ranking clergy to shield Zero from scrutiny raised questions about what they might be trying to hide. Was this simply an attempt to protect their reputation, or was there more at stake? The church's history of covering up scandals lent credibility to the idea that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of secrecy and deflection. The community, grappling with these possibilities, found itself torn between loyalty to the church and a growing sense of betrayal. For many, the idea that someone within their trusted institution could be capable of such an act was too much to bear. Yet, the evidence was impossible to ignore, leaving them to question the very foundation of their beliefs. As these theories circulated, one thing became clear. The truth behind Sister Margaret's death was far more complex than it initially seemed. The layers of personal conflict, ritualistic elements, and institutional interference created a tapestry of intrigue that defied easy answers. The crime was not just a singular act of violence, but a reflection of deeper fractures within the church and the community it served. The investigation left a trail of unanswered questions. Was Margaret's death a crime of passion or a calculated ritual? Was Zero acting alone, or was he part of something larger? And most haunting of all, what was the true motive behind the act? These questions lingered in the minds of investigators and the community alike, casting a long shadow over the chapel and its once sacred halls. The case of Sister Margaret's tragic death left an indelible mark on the community, but the answers it provided were far from satisfying. Father Zero Robinson, at the center of the controversy, remained an enigmatic figure. Despite the weight of evidence against him, his defiant denials and the church's intervention clouded the possibility of a clear resolution. For many, the case represented not only a failure of justice, but a broader reflection of the fragility of trust in those entrusted with spiritual and moral authority. The positioning of Margaret's body, the symbols surrounding her, and the ritualistic implications created a narrative that was both chilling and hauntingly ambiguous. Was her death the culmination of personal tensions, or did it signify something far darker, a secret that the church sought to bury? The conflicting theories only deepened the sense of unease, leaving lingering doubts about whether the full truth would ever come to light. For the community, the case became a painful reminder of the complexities within the institutions they revered. The steadfast loyalty of Zero's supporters clashed with the outrage of those who demanded accountability, fracturing the unity that the chapel had once symbolized. The church's reluctance to cooperate fully with the investigation only fueled suspicions, raising questions about what other secrets might be hidden behind its walls. The implications of the case extended far beyond Toledo. It became a symbol of the tension between faith and institutional transparency, highlighting the challenges of reconciling spiritual devotion with the need for accountability. For those who followed the case, it was a stark reminder that even within the most sacred spaces, human flaws and hidden agendas could take root. As the investigation faded from public attention, the unanswered questions continued to echo. What truly happened on that fateful morning? What drove a man of faith to the edge? Or was he an innocent figure caught in a web of suspicion and secrecy? The community's inability to find closure mirrored the broader struggle to understand the complexities of the human condition, where light and darkness often coexist in ways that defy simple explanations. These questions remain as open as they were on the day Sister Margaret was found. The case invites reflection not only on the events themselves, but on the broader themes of trust, faith, and the pursuit of truth in a world where they are so often tested. It is a story that continues to provoke thought and discussion, urging those who hear it to question what they believe and why they believe it. Throughout history, cases like that of Sister Margaret's tragic death have emerged, each shrouded in a mixture of mystery, faith, and unsettling questions. This particular incident in Toledo recalls other moments when sacred spaces became the backdrop for chilling events, challenging the perception of places meant to represent peace and sanctity. As we close this chapter, it's clear that the questions surrounding this case extend far beyond a single crime. They challenge us to examine the balance between belief and accountability, between loyalty and truth. Stories like this leave an imprint not just because of their mystery, but because they resonate with our collective desire to understand the unknown and reconcile the contradictions of human behavior. What are your thoughts on the complexities of this case? Do you believe the full truth will ever emerge, or is it destined to remain an unsolved enigma? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that explore the shadows where light and darkness meet.